Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Rubin speaking to you just east of Jerusalem. Today is the 8th day of the month of Sivan, 5782. It's June 7th, 2022. This coming Shabbat. Here in Israel, we'll be reading Parashat Beha'alotcha from the book of Numbers, chapter 8:1 to chapter 12, verse 16. Again, we are still 1 week ahead of the diaspora here in our Torah reading. So in the diaspora, you will be reading this week what we read last week, which is Parashat Naso. But we're moving right along here. Beha'alotcha, when you, what does that translate as? When you raise up. Literally, it means when you raise up, when you cause to go up. And unliterally, let's say, it means when you kindle the lamps of the menorah. We're going to be talking about that in a minute. Parashat Beha'alotcha, it's a very, very gorali, very, very fateful parasha, because it starts one way and it ends another way. And we'll be talking about that in a minute. Today, the 7th day of June, is actually the Gregorian calendar anniversary of the liberation of the Temple Mount. We celebrated it on Jerusalem Day a week ago, Yom Yerushalayim here in Israel, because we celebrated it on the anniversary of the Hebrew Day, which is the 28th of Iyar, which was last week. But the actual Gregorian Day is the 7th of June. The war began, I believe, on the 5th and ended on the 10th of June in 1967. And it was on the 7th that the Israeli paratroopers entered into the old city and captured, liberated the Temple Mount. Last week on Yom Yerushalayim, there were so many exciting things happening here that we spent the day posting the current events. We really didn't get much into the history or even an opportunity to recapture what took place on those days in 1967. So today, June 7th, taking the opportunity of posting a few videos showing actual footage from the troops entering into Jerusalem, going onto the Temple Mount. And of course, we're also showing today our own video of Rav Yisrael Ariel, the founder and head of the Temple Institute, who was one of those paratroopers who liberated the Temple Mount, which is what inspired some years later the Temple Institute, and he has since dedicated his life to educating Israel, educating the nations about the significance of the Holy Temple, why we need it today, its history, and of course also preparing, doing everything in our power to prepare physically, practically, for the building of the Holy Temple. And of course, to that end, we have recreated the vessels, the sacred vessels used in the Holy Temple, and educating and publishing and artistic renderings of the temple and the ceremonies in the temple, etc., etc. But so we also have a short video of his recollections, which we've first recorded in 2009. And if you've seen it before, I suggest you watch it again. If you haven't, make sure to see it. Very fascinating. And it's very interesting because we've been posting these short clips that the Israeli Defense Forces have put out over the years of what happened in 67. And it's very fascinating. You know, we have the dramatic announcement, Harabayit Beyadenu, that famous announcement, the Temple Mount is in our hands. Mota Gor was the head of he led the paratroopers into Jerusalem. And when they arrived in the Temple Mount, he said, Harabayit Beyadenu, the Temple Mount is in our hands. And of course, that has become kind of an ironic and painful affirmation, because if you're following what's going on in Israel, if you're following what we're reporting on our Facebook page, it's still not really in our hands because Israel immediately um, uh, basically seceded control over the mountain and gave administrative control to the Muslim Waqf. And it's been a bad situation ever since. So it's kind of painful to hear that the Temple Mount is in our hands, to hear that statement. And what's also interesting is in these videos, and in fact, one video, as he's saying that, they're not even showing the Temple Mount, they're showing the Western Wall. And in the second video, which we've posted, they do show the Temple Mount for a few seconds. And then we hear, and it's a famous person who's saying this, I can't remember who, saying, I am now going down the stairs. He's leaving the Temple Mount and going down the stairs to the Western Wall. And he's very, very emotional about this because he's going to the Western Wall and he's touching the stones of the Western Wall. Far be it from me to denigrate the Western Wall, its significance to the Jewish people, but it's not the Temple Mount. And the reason why Jews in recent history, and only in recent history, maybe the past 150 years, were confined to praying at the Western Wall is because the Ottoman authorities would not let Jews go anywhere else and certainly would not let them go up onto the Temple Mount. And that's why Jews were praying at the Western Wall. But the moment that Israel took control of the Temple Mount, it should have been everybody's desire to be on the Temple Mount, the place of the Holy Temple. And for all sorts of reasons, forgetfulness, historical forgetfulness, and Israel had been banned from even arriving at the Western Wall for 19 years, the 19 years that the Jordanians had control of the old city of Jerusalem, even though there had been an agreement at the armistice signing in 1949 that the Jordanians would allow Jews access to the Western Wall, but they not for a moment honored that commitment. Nor do they honor today their commitment in the 1994 peace treaty to ensure freedom of worship for all monotheistic faiths on the Temple Mount. That's another story, but so apparently it was in the Israeli Jewish mindset, heart set of 1967 that as soon as they had control of the old city, they went to the Western Wall. And that became the focal point. And then almost immediately, Moshe Dayan, who was the head of the defense at the time, he wanted to give up the Temple Mount. He didn't want to even go into the old city. He did not want the Temple Mount. He did not want the old city. And we've posted an article today also called something about this, Israel's amazing concessions in 1967. The Israeli leadership was, even when they entered into the old city, and by that time most of the Jordanian troops had already fled, they were terrified of a Muslim reaction, that there'd be more war if Israel were to assert itself on the Temple Mount. So they did a little dance, and they tried to act as if it didn't happen. Let's just pretend that we never liberated the Temple Mount. Now, our troops were brave, and they were gallant, but the war and the result of the war, the victory, was a gift, an outright gift from HaShem. Which again, I don't want to minimize the bravery of our troops, and certainly, God forbid, to diminish the memory of those that fell, and many fell in that war, including many fell in the battle for Jerusalem. There were some very fierce battles before entering into the old city, but it was a gift from Hashem. And when Hashem gives you the Temple Mount, it's for one reason. I mean, duh. Like, why else would Hashem, after 2,000 years, place the Temple Mount in the hands of the state of Israel, the newborn state of Israel? Why? If not for the purpose of returning Jewish worship to the Temple Mount, not for the purpose of rebuilding the Holy Temple. So our leadership then, including the rabbinic leadership, shamefully, as well as the political leadership, sort of closed their eyes and pretended that it didn't happen, and did everything they could in order to cause the people to forget what the Temple Mount was about. And they started to emphasize the centrality of the Western Wall, and the Rabbanut, the rabbinical authority, forbid Jews from entering into the Temple Mount, saying that we don't know where the temple stood exactly, so you shouldn't go anywhere because certain places you're not permitted to go, and we don't want it to be desecrated. And so, boom, this went into effect almost immediately, within days or less after the victory in 67. And it's taken all these years to begin to undo that terrible legacy of turning our backs to the Temple Mount. I don't like to talk about it. I'd much rather talk about, wow, amazing, the victory, and we took the Temple Mount, and we go up to the Temple Mount today. But there is this problem that Israel really wasn't ready for it spiritually. The nation was immature. It wasn't ready for this great privilege and responsibility of embracing the Temple Mount and all that it stood for and all its potential. And it's taken many, many years of dedication and hard work and persistence by people like Rav Ariel, the head of the Temple Institute, by the Temple Institute, who has played a major part in returning and redirecting the hearts of Jews around the world and of Israel and of Gentiles around the world toward the Temple Mount and toward the Holy Temple. And over the years, many other activists and many other organizations have also joined in the struggle. The struggle for to return physically and spiritually to the Temple Mount, to struggle for justice on the Temple Mount, for freedom of worship, for freedom of access, for freedom of movement on the Temple Mount, for all faiths, not just for Jews, for all faiths, because that's the dream, that's the power, that's the potential of the Holy Temple. As Isaiah said, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. And when King Solomon dedicated the first Holy Temple, he called upon the nations from afar to come, and he called upon HaShem to listen to and to hearken to the prayers of the nations, because it is a mikdash, a sanctuary for the world, for humanity, for mankind. It's not a Jewish temple. It's not a Jewish synagogue. It is a sanctuary where Hashem's presence dwells, and where Hashem wants all his children from all the nations to gather together and to be with him. So we celebrate the liberation of the Temple Mount in 1967, but we're still working on it. And our struggle now is an internal struggle. I know that the Jordanians will do everything in their power to keep us away, and I know that the Palestinians will, and unfortunately the United States also will do everything in its power to keep us away because they don't want trouble. And so principles that the United States stands for, like freedom of worship, get swept under the carpet for the sake of quiet. But we see that as long as there aren't Jews on the Temple Mount, and that there's not quiet on the Temple Mount, that's when the rioting starts. That's when the violence starts. That's when the war starts. So Hashem's telling us something all along the way. He's always telling us something, and there's no clearer messages from Hashem than the messages that we get directly from the Temple Mount. And when Jews are on the Mount, there's quiet. And when Jews are told not to go on the Mount for this reason or that, then there's not quiet. Then there's violence. So again, it's a wonderful anniversary. And of course, the 6-Day War, Israel returned to Judea and Samaria, also to the Sinai, which Israel has since handed over to Egypt, and also to the Golan Heights, which was also part of a biblical Israel, and of course Jerusalem and the old city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. So there's so much to be grateful for, so much to be thankful for, and so much to still work for and struggle for. We have to keep our eye on the ball and not take anything for granted. And the progress that we have made over the years, and especially in recent years, toward returning the hearts and the physical presence of Jews, Israelis, and Gentiles to the Temple Mount has been astonishing, and we're just getting started here. Beha'alotcha, this week's parsha, it begins with a beautiful few verses. We'll read them in Hebrew and then in English. It's chapter 8, verse 1. Vayedaber HaShem el Moshe lemor deber el Aharon va'amat elav beha'alotcha et hanerot el mul pnei hamenorah ya'iru shivat hanerot vayas ken Aharon el mul pnei hamenorah he'ela nerotea ka'asher tziva HaShem et Moshe. וזה מעשה המנורה מקשה זהב עד ירחה עד פירחה מקשה היא כמראה אשר הראה השם את משה כן עשה את המנורה. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to Aaron and say to him, When you kindle the lamps toward the face of the menorah, shall the 7 lamps cast light. Aaron did so toward the face of the menorah. He kindled its lamps as Hashem had commanded Moshe. This is the workmanship of the menorah, hammered out gold from its base to its flower. It is hammered out. According to the vision that Hashem Moshe, so did he make the menorah. So, Beha'alotcha, again, means when you raise up. And literally, it's because when you kindle a flame, when you light a wick, the flame raises up. But of course, there's this beautiful understanding also of rising up, a spiritual uplift in the kindling of the menorah, and also a very beautiful word play, let's say, is the work of the hatava of the menorah. The hatava means the cleaning. Each morning, a kohen would clean out the lamps and clean out and replace the wicks. And replenish the oil. And that's called hatava, which literally means improvement, from the word tov, to good, to make better. So these names of these different activities around the menorah are very inspiring when you think about them, inspiring in the Hebrew. So Rashi, the great commentator, asks, why does it mention it here now? It's mentioned, this is again the first day of the inauguration of the tabernacle, which we've read about many times. The Torah is so enamored by the tabernacle and by its inauguration, by its first day, that it just keeps hearkening back to it. And so here, once again, we're back in that first day of the month of Nisan, the second year after the Exodus from Egypt. And we just read at the conclusion of Parashat Naso, the preceding parsha, the preceding reading, about the 12 tribal chiefs who each brought gifts to the tabernacle on the occasion of the inauguration. And so Rashi says, why do we mention here that Aaron is kindling the menorah? Why is it placed here in the narrative? And the answer that he quotes from Midrash is that Aaron was a bit crestfallen because he saw that all the heads of all the other tribes had the honor of bringing these gifts, and he didn't, because his work was in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, not bringing gifts to the tabernacle. And so Hashem said through Moshe, he said to Aaron, really? Really, Aaron, you got the best job of all, because you get to work in the tabernacle, you get to work in the Mishkan, and you get to light the menorah. And so Aaron was comforted, and he lit the menorah, and Aaron did so. It says he did so just as he was commanded, And then the Parsha goes on to give a very brief description once again of how the menorah was made, a very, very brief description. And then we have a very interesting passage about the preparation, the sanctifying of the Levites who are going to serve, also do all their different tasks that they had to do in and around the Mishkan, the tabernacle, much of which had to do with transportation of the tabernacle and the disassemble of the tabernacle when it was time to break camp and to move, and the reassembling when it was time to pitch your tents again and be stationary, all according to the will of HaShem, who would express His will, as we learned in last week's parsha and also in this week's parsha, via the Anan, the cloud of glory that always hovered over the tabernacle, and when it would rise up, it meant it was time to move on, and when it would re-descend onto the tabernacle, it was time to make a camp and to set up camp again. So, and after that preparation of the Levites, we have the very, very fascinating passage which we talk about different times in the year of the second Passover. And of course, again, we're in the second year, and so they just had the inauguration of the tabernacle on the 1st of Nisan, and of course on the 14th is already time for the Korban Pesach, for the Passover offering. And so some men approached Moshe and they said, "We're tamei met. We are impure because we've come into contact with a corpse, a dead body, and we don't have time now to go through the purification process. So what can we do? We don't want to miss out on this amazing mitzvah, this amazing commandment to bring the Passover offering." And so Moshe does something astonishing, or maybe not. He says, "Wait a minute, I'm going to ask Hashem what to do." So here we see a beautiful living example of I would say an early example of the Torah Shebe'al Peh, the oral Torah, which we talk about and which we Jews hold by, which is the unwritten Torah, which parallels and is alongside the written Torah, and the understanding that Moshe received both at Sinai, and the oral Torah was passed along orally. It wasn't written down until many, many centuries later in the Mishnah and the Gemara, when after the destruction of the Holy Temple and the Jewish community in the land of Israel and outside it was very challenged and scattered, and the sages and rabbis decided at the time that it was time to write these things down so they wouldn't be lost. But that is still the oral Torah. And so here's a case where something wasn't written. It didn't come down alongside the other things that we've already learned about Passover, and they had a question. So Moshe asked Hashem, who talks about if you couldn't bring your Passover offering on the first opportunity on the 14th of Nisan, because you were either tamei met and impure because of contact with a corpse and had no opportunity to overcome that, to purify yourself, or because you were on the way to and again, this is jumping ahead in history. You're on the way to Jerusalem to bring your offering, and you just couldn't make it there on time. Then you can do your offering on the 14th of the following month, which is the 14th of Iyar, which has come to be known as a second Passover, and it's really come to be known as the holiday of second chances. The idea of commandments, the idea of mitzvot, is to do them, because by doing them, we make a connection. We strengthen our bond with Hashem, and so if there's a potential do it, if they have a second opportunity to do it, then why not? Of course, we should have a second opportunity, and that's the spirit which really informs Hashem's answer here. That if at first you don't succeed, try again. You have another opportunity. And then the Parsha, the Torah reading, goes on to very vividly describe once again that first day that the tabernacle was inaugurated. And reading from chapter 9, verse 15 in the book of Numbers, on the day the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle. That was a tent for the testimony. And in the evening there would be upon the tabernacle like a fiery appearance until morning. So it would always be, the cloud would cover it, and an appearance of fire at night. And whenever the cloud was lifted from atop the tent, afterwards the children of Israel would journey. And in the place where the cloud would rest, there the children of Israel would encamp. According to the word of HaShem would the children of Israel journey, and according to the word of HaShem would they encamp. And it also goes on to mention that Hashem commands Moshe now to fashion some silver trumpets for the purpose of alerting all the tribal encampments when it's time to move on. This is a sort of like the original WhatsApp to get the message out quickly to everybody, and then goes on to describe the order in which the different tribal encampments would break camp and start to proceed forward. And of course, we read about in the past two parshiot in Bamidbar and Naso, we read about the tribal encampments, how they're set around the tabernacle, and everyone would move forward in unison. Until they reached the place where Hashem decided it was time to rest again. So it doesn't really get much better than this. I mean, this is sort of like, it's to me, it's beautiful. Like, they've done it. They left Egypt. They received the Torah. They built the tabernacle. All that in the first year. They inaugurated the tabernacle. They're doing everything according to Hashem's will. And now they're going to move forward and head into the land. That's the next step. They're going to take this whole new reality and bring it into the land of Canaan and establish a Torah-based society and a tabernacle/temple-based society in the land of Israel. It's going to happen. And then we read about, in verse 29 of chapter 10, it says, Moshe said to Chovav, son of Reuel. This is Moshe's father-in-law, who's also known as Jethro. Moshe said to Chovav, son of Reuel, the Midianite, the father-in-law of Moshe, we are journeying to the place of which Hashem has said, I shall give it to you. Go with us, and we shall treat you well, for Hashem has spoken of good for Israel. And Yitro answers, he said to him, I shall not go, only to my land and my family shall I go, he said. Please do not forsake us inasmuch as, this is Moshe now responding, please do not forsake us inasmuch as you know our encampments in the wilderness, and you have been as eyes for us. And it shall be that if you come with us, then with the goodness which Hashem will benefit us, we will do good to you. But Yitro keeps to his decision, and he does not journey on with Israel, but returns to his homeland. And then we read, they journeyed from the mountain of Hashem, that would be Mount Sinai, a 3-day distance, and the Ark of the Covenant of Hashem journeyed before them a 3-day distance to search out for them a resting place. The cloud of Hashem was over them by day when they journeyed from the camp. And then we come to this very unique passage in the entire Torah, where it's 2 verses that are within parentheses. Now, these aren't parentheses, modern parentheses. They're the letter Nun that are inverted on either side of these 2 verses. And this is in a Sefer Torah. This is in a scroll of the Torah that it's written this way. It's very, very unique. And These two verses go like this. I'm going to read in Hebrew, then in English. Vayehi b'naso ha'aron vayomer Moshe kuma Hashem v'yafutzu oyevecha v'yanusu masanecha mipanecha uvenucho yoma shuva Hashem revavot alafei Yisrael. And in English, when the ark would journey, Moshe said, "Arise, Hashem, and let your foes be scattered. Let those who hate you flee from before you." And when it rested, he would say, "Reside tranquilly, O Hashem, among the myriad thousands of Israel." These beautiful, beautiful lines, which we say when we take the Sefer Torah, the Torah scroll, out of the ark, out of the Aron. It's the same word. We call it the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark. It's the cabinet in a synagogue where we house the Sefer Torah, the Torah scroll. We repeat these, we say these verses, beautiful verses, and they are unique. They stand alone. And there's even an ancient tradition that suggests that these two verses form their own book. There are 5 books of the Torah, 5 books of Moshe, the Chumash, it's called in Hebrew. Chumash means 5. Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of the Torah. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But within the book of Numbers, there's this other book, which consists of 2 verses. So if we follow through on that, it means that the book of Numbers is divided into 3 books. And there really is a division here, because up till here in the book of Numbers, it's been organizing the encampment, it's been moving forward, it's been everything beautiful. Just the nation of Israel is just humming along, functioning beautifully. Everybody's got their task, everybody's doing their task, everybody's working in unison. It's all good, and this is really the height. When the ark would journey, arise Hashem, and let your foes be scattered, etc., etc. This is beautiful. It doesn't get any better than this. And then immediately after this, the very next verse, chapter 11, verse 1, the people took to seeking complaints. It was evil in the ears of Hashem, and Hashem heard, and his wrath flared, and a fire of Hashem burned against them, and it consumed at the edge of the camp. Immediately after we reach this pinnacle of harmony, of beauty, of tranquility, of holiness, we read about the people start complaining, and that's a very good translation here. The people took to seeking complaints, because the Hebrew is vayihi mit onanim. They were like complainers. They didn't have what to complain about, but they just couldn't maintain this tranquility. They started to complain. They came up with stuff. We're hungry, right? We miss Egypt. We miss the food we had there. This is insane. You were slaves in Egypt. So again, it's the beginning of what we all know, because we've read the book before. But what we're going to learn is the beginning of a troubled season for Israel. Things just go south from here. Things just go downhill. There's one complaint after other, one catastrophe after other. And of course, next week's parasha here in Israel is Shalach, which is relates the story of the spies, and we know what happens then. So, what can I say? It's sometimes when things are so good they can't get any better, they get worse. It happens. It's human nature, and the one thing that we can count on is that we're humans, and the one thing that we can be comforted by is that we are humans because God created us that way, and he had a reason for creating us as humans. And with all our human foibles and weaknesses, it's part of the plan, I guess, and it's part of what Hashem loves about his children. So, yeah, sometimes when we're at the very top, we find that we're at the bottom, but we won't stay there for long. We're going to keep moving up. Thank you so much for being with me here on Temple Talk. Have a very good week. Temple Talk.